The Gift of Gab Show, your go-to lifestyle podcast, covering everything from psychology and relationships to politics and current events. Live from Chicago, it's The Gift of Gab Show. Gift of Gab Show. Here's your host, Gabby Smith.
Hi, this is The Gift of Gab Show. I am your host, Gabby Smith. Today, we are talking about a very sensitive topic. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 20 people per minute are domestically abused in the United States. Joining me today to explain abuse amongst all genders is Melody Blake. Thank you for joining me today, Melody.
Hi, thank you for having me, Gabby.
So, Melody, what is your background when it comes to domestic violence?
I've been in law enforcement for the past 26 years, but I've specifically dealt in domestic violence for the last 16 years.
So you know a lot about domestic violence?
Unfortunately, yes.
That's tough. That's a tough area to be in. But you definitely are a good person to have on today's show because you can tell our listeners what are some of the early signs of an abusive relationship.
Some of them are so not quiet, but they're not obvious. You know, the hand holding, you don't have to hold someone's hand for the entire walk down the street. You don't have to constantly be looking in someone's eyes, or the constant phone calls, things that you think are endearing initially because this is this new person in your life are sometimes the signs that this is going to be a bad relationship.
Really? So just holding hands with someone? Is it just that the control?
Well, sometimes it'll go from you're walking down the street and you're not holding hands and a gentleman will walk up and then the hand holding starts.
Oh, wow.
Or a female will walk in and then, you know, you're marking your territory, as it were. So they're just little things.
Does it start off little and just get bigger over time? How does that work?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes it is something very minor. Are you going to wear that? You know, are you wearing that dress? Or, you know, is that really how you want to wear your hair? You know, little questions, little things that will make you rethink who you are.
So how can someone protect themselves from getting into an abusive relationship? Or is it even possible? Does it just happen and you just kind of slip into it and you don't even realize you're in it?
I think that people who are comfortable within themselves, people who know their self-worth, people who are comfortable being in a group, comfortable being by themselves, they kind of already know. When you can be who you are with someone without having to change who you are, that's a good relationship. But when people come in and they start wanting to change little things about you, the things that they liked about you that drew them to you are now the things that they change or want to be changed, that's a sign.
So you mentioned self-worth. Okay, so that usually happens through maturity and through with time and age. So how common is it for teens to experience abuse? Because you would think as a teenager, you don't really know much, right? I mean, you're kind of out there just trying to figure it out, and you think you know everything, but you don't really know nothing. So how are you as a teen going to avoid these abusive relationships when you don't know your self-worth?
It's a difficult question, a fair question. And you just have to, you learn by example. So hopefully there are good mentors in your life, a strong mom, a dad in your household where you see what a real relationship is, where you see the give and take. You asked me specifically to teenagers, but there are some older women who still fall into the same traps because at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be loved by someone, and they will accept whatever attention or affection that they get, whether it's negative, whether it's abusive. It doesn't matter as long as they can claim at the end of the day that they have a man or they have a woman.
Okay.
So it's
right. And I was going to ask you that because a lot of times you think domestic violence, you think a woman is getting beat up, right? I mean, that's typically what people think when they hear that term. So how common is it for men to get abused physically, sexually, emotionally? Or is it that common? Is it truly women that are typically getting beat up?
I'm not going to say that it's 50-50, but there are far more men who are in abusive relationships where they are the abused
Wow.
where they are the victim, then one would believe. And I think most people think in terms of relationships being heterosexual, male and female, and they're not. This is new. So now we're seeing women on women, men on men. You have transgenders. People are trying to find their identities. And in doing so, I think there's some toes that are being stepped on. Everybody wants to have their voice heard, but they're not necessarily willing to listen to someone else's voice. And I think that's where a lot of the issues come into play.
So with that said, if this is happening, whether you're a teenager or you're an older woman or male or whatever, is it passed from generation to generation then? Is it something that, say, you saw it in your home, you think this is just the way things are, and you get yourself into an abusive relationship? Is that how it typically works, or is it different?
It could be that way if that's what you're used to. If you grew up in a household where your parents argued, where they showed love, and their idea of love was that fight, that argument, and that's how you grew up, that's what you will emulate. You'll be that person in your relationship. Maybe you came from a loving household, but your significant other did not. So they're bringing something to the table that you're not expecting, but you think you love them. So you will do whatever, you'll follow their lead. You'll do whatever they're doing to make them feel comfortable. And if that means the argument, if that means the fist fight, the degradation, you accept it. And then that becomes your norm.
Okay, but like Tina Turner said, what's love got to do with it? Because
absolutely nothing.
Why do women and men stay? But again, it's easier said than done, I'm sure, right?
It's a lot easier. And that's the same thing I thought. Well, let me say it this way. I do domestic violence not because it's just my job. It's something that I do because I've been a victim, but I've also been an offender.
Wow.
I didn't come from an abusive family. We didn't see our parents arguing or fighting. They were very politically correct, I guess would be the terminology. But my spouse at the time came from an abusive background. Every single Friday, my mother-in-law would come home after work, and she'd have her alcohol, and she'd beat up her husband.
So she was beating up her husband.
She was beating up her husband, and
this is in what time period?
This was the early 80s.
Now, that is amazing. This is pre-internet. This is
yes.
All the technology that we have today. So you probably didn't hear much about the woman actually being the abuser.
And when I tell you that it was the most amazing thing that I had ever seen, because I didn't grow up that way. And it was so commonplace within their family that when it happened, no one, dropped their fork. No one left the room. It just happened, and, Ma's home.
And so it only happened after she had been drinking?
It only happened. It was amazing. She would leave Friday morning. She'd be sober as a judge. She'd come home Friday from work. She'd be drunk. And it would last the rest of the evening on Friday, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning she'd be sober.
That is amazing.
It was the most amazing thing to me. So I guess I learned to live within that paradigm. It wasn't what I was used to, but I'm married. I'm living within this family now, and these are my family, and you just do what they do.
So is abuse more common in certain socioeconomic demographics or race?
I think how it's expressed is determined more so by your demographic. I think the average middle-class family, or, it's a little difficult. Lower middle-class families, they're more expressive with how they do things. I think in families where you have lawyers and doctors as parents, there's still domestic violence there. I just think that it's expressed differently. I don't think it's as violent as in middle or lower class families. It's more insipid. It might be a bruise on an arm that's going to be covered. or it's a statement. It's not something that's necessarily physical.
So going back to your ex-husband and your ex-mother-in-law beating up your ex-father-in-law, do you think that the family might have reacted differently if it was the husband actually beating up the wife and not vice versa?
Probably.
And how so? Explain
Probably.
that.
I think that most instances of domestic violence are expected to be male on female, and women are always expected to be the victims. So I think, and we all grew up, boys don't hit girls. We teach our sons that there's never any circumstance ever where you should hit a girl. And we teach our sons that they can't cry, they have to be men, they have to be strong. But we don't teach our daughters that it's not okay to push buttons. We don't teach our daughters that it's not okay to instigate. So, and it goes against the domestic violence paradigm that everyone follows. I'm a little different. Because I was also a victim and an offender, I've been that person that pushed buttons.
And when you say you were a victim, so you were abused in your marriage?
Yes.
So what type of abuse? Was it a physical, mental?
It was a little of both. It initially started out physical.
Oh, really? So it didn't start off mental. He would do what physically?
Pushing, shoving. And it got to the point where it went from the physical to the mental to the emotional. And for me, it got to be a situation where any attention was preferable to no attention. So I would then get in his face. I would start, the conversation. I would start yelling and screaming. And then I would start pushing and shoving and touching. And you can only shove someone so many times before they shove back. So I think that we need to start teaching our children differently. Not only is it not okay for boys to hit girls, it's not okay for girls to hit boys. And if anybody hits someone else, whoever does the hitting should expect to get hit back.
And you raised such an excellent point because you don't think that, right? I mean, you just hear about boys beating up girls and that's it. And you don't think about the other side, about the girls poking and, trying to get some type of reaction from the boy. And that's something that the media does not really talk about.
Our guys are being vilified. They're being expected to do something that it's not humanly possible to do. Even animals, if they're constantly provoked, are going to react. And you want this young person who has not been taught some other way to deal with what's going on, you want them to just, walk away. But in the same respect, you want them to be the protector. You want them to fight, but you don't want them to fight.
So with that said, do you think that maybe we should have some type of classes in schools where children can learn that abuse is wrong? Because, I'm asking that because, a lot of times, abuse is learned at home, as we mentioned. So if you see dad beating up mom or mom beating up dad, you grow up expecting and thinking this is how it's supposed to be. So do you think the school system does enough to help teach our children that no one should hit anyone, to your earlier point?
I feel so sorry for teachers. They are expected to do more than their fair share. They are expected to teach. They're expected to counsel. They're expected to nurture. It's not their job to do everything. They can't be everything to all people. And they are cutting back on the resources. They're cutting back on, so many of the things that we used to have available to us or teachers would have available to them. They're not there anymore. So to put this on a teacher or to put this on a counselor, I think is crazy. I think that if domestic violence is going to be stopped or stemmed or curbed, I guess, you have to start within the home. So you have to identify a problem within a home. So maybe the teacher is that first person who happens to see, maybe little Johnny is coming to school tired, or, he's got a bruise or whatever. But our inner city kids are dealing with so many other issues that I don't even think domestic violence ranks. I just don't.
Well, and it's so unfortunate because I feel like, with the internet and social media, I mean, you were describing your ex-mother-in-law beating up your ex-father-in-law, but that was back in the 80s, right? So
Yes.
I talked about that, right? Before internet and all this stuff. Well, now we've got Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and all this stuff that honestly, it kind of makes it like it's okay. You think about celebrities and athletes that have set a tone for, domestic violence. You've got, Chris Brown, Ray Rice, and it kind of happened and it kind of went away, right? So do you feel like we as a society are just starting to become a little numb to domestic violence?
Yes, I do think that it is just who we have become. Everyone is angry about something, and they're just looking for an outlet. I'm a fan of all music. I really have an issue, though, with some of the videos that are out that are violently expressive. I just think that when you have a young mind that is not formed, that, is not mature enough to recognize that what they are seeing is not necessarily the right thing to do, I think that you set yourself up for failure. And let's face it, back in the 80s, we didn't have the internet. There was no Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. So as a parent, you have to sit down and talk to your children. Now, everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on Instagram, everybody's on social media, and no one is necessarily monitoring the social media. No one is necessarily paying attention to what is actually being done or said through social media. I think it gives people a false sense of security, a false sense of bravado. So they think they can say and do whatever and then step back. And I think a lot of domestic violence situations, whether they are dealing with teenagers or adults, follow back to Facebook. Someone posting something on Facebook. And now one of the big things is posting sexually explicit pictures as a way to get back at your significant other. So we're dating and everything is great, but now it's not. So, it's unfortunate. So I think that parents, social media, sports figures, musicians, everyone has a responsibility to mentor someone. It's not about the money. It's not about, the gold around your neck or, the house that you live in. It's what you give back. Because once you throw something out there, once you post something, it's there, and you can't get that back. And I don't think that children recognize that, and I don't think some adults recognize that.
Well, you mentioned mentors, which I think is such a big gap because a lot of young kids don't have mentors. They don't have role models that they can look up to. And what they do have is the internet. They have Facebook, like you mentioned, right? I mean, I recently saw on Instagram women being literally thrown off roofs of houses and laughing about it. A guy was just pushing women off one by one. And that becomes a joke, right? And it becomes like, ha, 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 do it again kind of thing. And when you see that kind of abusive behavior as a child, you're thinking, hey, throw me off a roof, and it just seems so, weird and kind of crazy. I'm even saying this, but it's happening. It's out there. Social media is international. People from all over the world are posting crazy things. And if you don't have a mentor, you don't have someone to look up to, that is your role model. That's who you've got your phone. Everybody's on their phone 24/7, looking it up, different things, watching these videos. And unfortunately, that's what they're seeing.
And no one is monitoring that. The laws aren't keeping up with the crimes that are taking place. There's nothing in the rational mind that would allow a rational person to think that pushing someone off a roof is a good thing. That's not a good thing. But we have been so desensitized to violence, to, back when I was growing up, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, our cartoons were actually cartoons, and they were obviously cartoons. There was nothing real life about them. So you had the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, and Wile E. Coyote got killed at least 3 times in every episode. He kept coming back, at least, right?
Yes.
But they were obviously cartoons.
Yes, kid-friendly.
Very kid-friendly in a sadistic sort of way.
Yes.
But still kid-friendly. It was obvious. Now you've got very real-life anime. You've got these video games where everything is real life, and real in air quotes. It's real, but it really isn't. And I think that because you don't have a balance, if all your child does is play, I can't even name one, Mortal Kombat, or what's the game with the Grand Theft Auto, right?
Yes.
You've got prostitutes, you've got car thieves, you've got people shooting up in alleys. If you don't counter that with something, then that is what they are going to believe, and that is what they are going to want to emulate. But at the end of the day, emulating Grand Theft Auto is going to get you put in jail or killed.
100% right.
So
those are your options.
And I think that all of that, and I know it sounds like we're going afield from the conversation, but I think that all of that comes back to the violence within the home. If you don't have something to counter what you see outside, then you're going to bring outside inside.
So as a victim of domestic violence, what are the short and long-term effects of domestic violence? And you can speak to it for yourself, being a victim, and you can just speak to cases that you've seen.
Short term, I don't know, the obvious, low self-esteem, inability to keep a job, not being able to say no to sex. Here's the thing. I see more cases where you have very young parents with multiple children, and with multiple fathers. It just they're not being valued. They're not being valued by the people that they connect with, and they're not being valued by themselves. So just short term, just the multiple pregnancies, inability to find work, inability to keep a job, housing. And you think in terms of when you raise your kids, you want to have a child, you want to have children. I know for me, I thought in terms of what I was going to be able to provide. And when you have 6, 7, 8 kids, you can barely provide a meal. So you're not going to provide, the education. You're not going to be able to provide college. You're not going to be able to provide the travel. These are the things that you need to remove yourself from the circumstance that we are in. You can't provide your kids a future. You can provide them love, but you're going to need just a little bit more to help them over that hump.
So you see a lot of various cases, I'm sure, but I'm also sure that a lot of cases probably don't go reported either. Why is that?
People are ashamed.
Or maybe scared?
Yes. And I came across a case the other day where a young lady was able to remove herself from a violent situation. She was able to, and she had been in it for a little while, but she was able to remove herself finally, move on. She found a very nice young man that she was dating, and the original boyfriend, the violent boyfriend, found where she was and came back, and he threatened the new boyfriend and told her that he would kill the new boyfriend if she didn't come back to him. So she went back. And I remember when I initially heard it, I'm thinking, well, that makes absolutely, positively no sense. If you're already out and you're safe, why don't you stay safe? But if you've been brainwashed to believe that someone is going to kill you, whether they really are or not is not the question. The fact that they've made you believe that they will is enough. And she went back. And, I can only hope that she figures out that I've done it before, I can do it again, But a lot of women and a lot of men, it's not just specific to women, they're just afraid. They've been broken.
Yeah. Yeah, no self-worth, right?
No self-worth, no self-esteem. They've probably been told that no one else is going to want you. You're not worthy of anybody. But you have to think, if I'm not worthy, if no one else wants or if no one wants me, why do you want me?
That's a great question. And a lot of women probably are so broken and they're so hurt, no self-worth, that they probably don't even think logically anymore. So that logical question probably goes out the window because they're not even at that space and time. I mean, they're so in the middle of their situation that they can't even think logically anymore. And unfortunately, with all these kids that they have, they're showing their kids this is how you should be treated. And it's wrong.
That is one of the things that I try to get across to men and women when I speak with them. You have to recognize that what you do in your life is what your children will do. So if you're in a domestic violence situation and your husband and or wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whomever, if they are being violent to you and they're calling you out of your name and they're hitting you and they're whatever it is they're doing, how you respond will be how your children respond. Or even worse than that, if you're raising sons as a mom, however that significant other is treating you, that's how your son's going to grow up to treat you. And that's a scary thought.
It's very scary.
That is a very scary thought. Or if you're raising daughters, then you're showing your daughters that this is how women are being treated. We live in the United States. There's no reason why our women are being treated or mistreated in this fashion. This is something that you would expect to see in a third world country or in an Islamic country where women are not as forward thinking as we are here. And it's not. There are plenty of women who are being forced to be submissive. They're being forced into situations where they're never going to be able to get out of. You have to, and I'm sorry, I know you have a question, but one of the things that is most important that I find is that you have to have your own something. Whether it's your own car, your own house, your own, whatever it is, but it has to be yours. So if you're feeding all these mouths, I know how difficult that must be, but you got to set aside a nickel and a dime. You got to have that jar somewhere with that money so that you can make the steps to get out. Because if you don't have anything, then you really are stuck.
Right. You're stuck. So tell me this. So if I have a friend that's in a violent situation, how do I help that abuse victim? What can I do to help someone that's going through this? I mean, give us some tips.
It depends on what they're willing to accept. I would be very leery to just say, okay, girl, come on, let's go. And you pack her up and you pack up the kids and you move them to your place. Because if she's not ready to make that cut and she's just trying to get him off of her for right now, then you are opening your home up to violence. Because he's either going to follow her or he's going to call her and you've made arrangements to have her safe and the kids are safe and she's going to go back. So I would think more. That would be the last step. So if this is the first time you're hearing about it, girl, what do you need me to do? Let me take the kids for a couple of days, or set up a bank account, and let her have some place to put a couple of nickels and dimes so that, she has some money saved up, because what's the old saying? Give somebody a fish and they'll eat for a day, but teach them how to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime.
Very true.
So you have to be able to give them things that they will be able to use over the course. I can't think of any instance in all the years that I've been doing this where the first time was the last time. Not one. It is a process, and I think people have to find their way and they have to come back into believing that they are worthy of something better. We're all looking for excitement in our relationships. And sometimes we bite off a little more than we can chew.
Well, if you've got someone that has decided, I'm out, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm leaving this man, he's abusing me, what tips do you have for a victim starting over? They're done, clearly they're not getting back together. How do they start over? I mean, it's a lot to have as your previous chapter in life. So what do you do moving forward?
I think that by the time most people, men and women, decide to move on, they've already started the process. It's not something that you're thinking about it right now, and right now is when you're doing it. By the time you finally make that decision, you've actually already started the process. So if keeping you barefoot and pregnant was one of the ways that they were able to control you, then stop having kids. You don't have to stop having sex, but there's nothing that says you have to keep having children. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that's home with these kids because you're barefoot and pregnant. You're the one who has to decide enough is enough. You have to take control. You have to make sure that the best of your ability, you get your kids what they need. Honestly, I'm a firm believer in having your stash. You got to have your stash. You have to have, a bus ticket to paradise. I don't know. You have to have something, though, that will allow you refuge. So if it's $25 and you can get a room at the Motel 6 for $10, then that's what you do. But you have to have a plan. You can't just, wing it. There's no winging it to this because it's something that you've done. It's been repetition probably for years. And now you're trying to break that repetition. So, and keep whatever plan you have to yourself. Don't telegraph. If you do this, I'm going to leave you. Because then they're looking for it. Just, okay. You take whatever you have to take until you don't have to take it anymore. And whether it's your kids in the back of your Pinto or, your bus pass, whatever it is, you go.
Well, sadly, domestic abuse can happen to anyone at any time. And, whether it's physical, psychological, abuse is abuse. And I just really want to thank Melanie Blake today for joining me. And really, honestly, you just really have done an excellent job just educating the listeners on abusive relationships. And if you or a loved one is experiencing any type of abuse, please get help. Please contact the National Abuse Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233. This hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All calls are confidential. Please, I beg you, if you're out there that needs some help, please get it. It's necessary for you and your future.
The Gift of Gab Show, hosted by Gabby Smith, is sponsored by Bar Louie, located at 1325 South Halsted Street in Chicago. Go there for the handcrafted martinis, 30 beers on tap, and delicious food. Open 7 days a week, 11 a.m. to 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. As Bar Louie always says, eat, drink, and be happy.